thinking about how far ahead some of you have been with, Damien talking about processing multiple giving of the exercises to, last month's presentation from Bellarmine about, well, how do you work with people who've already made some form of the exercises? And I'm thinking, what if you're on the opposite end and you're really just trying to kind of cultivate the soil and identify who could be good candidates for making the exercises, like Bob said, with the program that has been going on virtually this year between you, Brendan, and Damien. And I think about how this program that I ran last Lent, in addition with my ongoing work in faculty formation, was helpful for being able to identify who could be the sorts of people to make the exercises. So I think that's probably the most important aspect of how I'm framing this as a Lenten program. So I've titled it Homegrown Lenten Reflections, which is a spin-off the title that I gave to last year's series. And so a little bit of my context here, as I arrived at Regis almost 2 years ago and did a couple of these kind of like Tuesday morning faculty meetings or my first faculty and staff retreat day, I could just tell that, the staff here, 50% of the faculty or staff are in their first 5 years at the school building, which means they're all a part in some way, shape, or form in the Ignatian formation program, usually leading up to job security. But even for people who are veteran staff, there's a thirst, right? They've had a few different Jesuits in and out over the years, and let's just return to fundamentals. And I just could tell in the way that they responded to some of the fundamentals that it was a helpful refresher course, even for those who are veterans. So I thought about, well, what sort of opportunity does Lent now of last year of 2022 provide for giving something that's a little bit of a deeper dive for people who want to get involved in a spiritual community within the school building, for whom that would quench some of their thirst. And how do we thematize Lent? Given that at that point, that was only about a month and a half after the Omicron wave swept through New York, and 2 years after New York had been one of the original centers of the pandemic, the first year that we were mostly back to normal with in-person events. It's still not quite there. So even how does that shape a theme for Lent? Hope certainly stands out, that journey towards Easter, and that made for a natural arc to a program. Having been at the Jesuit School of Theology in Berkeley for 4 years, where they started up their own Lenten and Advent series of reflections. Those were daily reflections for the entire season. And I was a contributor. I had been with the Jesuits who were tasked as grad students in running that. So I got a sense of, well, how do you build up a reflection series from the ground up? But I knew that model. And I also really did value the sort of the research data that says homegrown reflections matter. Hearing voices from people in your community matters. We have so many pamphlets we can order, print or digital, that we can get people to subscribe to. And I try to include those links for Advent, for Lent on a weekly basis. I don't know how many people read them, but I suspect when it is homegrown, that might get people's attention. And the advantage of the homegrown is, well, then you can bring in the authors, whether they're a part of the weekly sharing group or they just are willing to at least come the week after they had written. That makes it much more personal and almost to get into their minds and hearts and share in that reflection process. As Bob mentioned a couple minutes ago, I inherited the Ignatian parents model. And just to give a backdrop, 2 predecessors ago was a Jesuit, Jim Krogan, who really did a lot to get Ignatian parents off the ground. They were meeting in 2 different groups on a weekly basis. They went over Zoom during the early years of the pandemic, and we've kept it at this level where Tuesday nights are Zoom, Wednesday morning following the regular Parents Club meeting is in person. So that gave me a sense of, okay, this notion of a group sharing, it can exist, and it can exist still in a post-pandemic world on 2 different platforms. And I myself had been familiar with the Zoom platform. I was a deacon when the pandemic broke out. We shifted into a lot of virtual ministries, and I was with some of my classmates at JST on the forefront of bringing those to the parishes where we were doing our diaconate ministry and encouraging others doing their different field ed ministries to go for the platform. And so I actually wrote my STL thesis on how did the use of Zoom platforms at parishes contribute to a sense of dialogue in church culture. So when I inherited a Zoom group of parents at my school, I thought, this is great. And how do I also replicate this with parents? And what is this saying about future platforms for creativity, of how we really get theological reflection being something that we all do, and we have voices that we can all be contributing authors to it, rather than that it's just coming from the sage on the stage and the traditional broadcast model, that even, something like a live stream or a recorded reflection keeps up the broadcast model, but something that actually has a chance for dialogue is a new course that's a change in church culture in many regards. So what I organized, and I took a screenshot of what the email here would have looked like, that would have come out on a Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock through a mail distribution server. So I did an 8-week series from Ash Wednesday through Easter Sunday. I first, went to ask a few members of the theology department, people who I know would be strong leadoff hitters. If they were interested, once I could tell they were interested, I expanded my outreach and tried to get a diverse set of approaches. I had the director of development picked up the theme of Saint Joseph, whose feast fell one of the weeks, and he wrote about what he's learned about Joseph being a young father. Art teachers talking about art and the resurrection, cooking. There was a whole variety of interdisciplinary approaches that people drew out, and folks mentioned how they appreciated the diversity of those perspectives, especially when the authors could be present in the sharing group. And the organization of it at that point was pretty simple. I just created a shared Google Doc that had the criterion and a schedule, and said, sign up here, and here's kind of the submission deadline. These are the weeks that are available. Here are the themes that people are writing about, and then we just followed that. And so I had to partner with the development office and the communications team. They helped me create the banner. I pre-decorated the chapel to make it look Lenten. They took a picture, and then it was just copy and paste once I had an edited draft, and they sent out the to the mail list to all faculty and staff. We decided we'll make it in-house, just for in-house for last year, and see what the reception was like. Here's a picture of our simple faculty lounge, and we met usually about 8 to 10 of us on a Tuesday afternoon, and a handful of people over Zoom on Thursday evenings. And the idea was, the start of our reflection was what you got out of your prayer with this week's writings. I started with kind of a general invitation. Whoever would wish to be part of this can, and then I made a little more targeted invitation, and so we arrived at that pretty steady number. Most people made it most weeks, like we know for any of these types of events. We were using in our Jesuit communities the 3-round spiritual conversation model, which many of you have become familiar with. Last year it was examining our poverty. This year we're using it for apostolic planning. I know in the eastern provinces, I know the western provinces in that process now. And any of us who had been at the JSN colloquium last June will remember how religiously we followed that during the 11 a.m. hour almost every day out there at Marymount. So I used that model, and that took a little bit of patience and training to get people to really want to open up, especially during the second rounds. What struck you? How did it move your feelings? And to get into the free flow conversation. And as I mentioned earlier, people really did benefit from having the reflection authors often present for the conversation. So looking back on last year's experience, how would I evaluate what were many of its benefits? Certainly, more broadly, I'd speak of it in terms of planting the seeds of faith, right? Empowering people to just tell something from their life story about how they made the connections to the gospel or the saint of that week, and to appropriate it, right? To really do, a reflection where they realize that what matters to them about it is something worth sharing with other people, to be able to own that element of their spirituality and write about it, knowing that there's an audience that will appreciate it, and even more than appreciate it, for those who could attend, to actually then get feedback on how much it moved them to read their stories and their perspectives. For myself, I also found that editing is a form of accompaniment, right? Leaning on my skill as somebody who teaches scripture and preaches, to be able to say, hey, how's your draft coming along? And then to go with them through that process, or maybe even a little earlier in it. Some people confidently had their draft written, and other people really wanted to sit down and brainstorm. And I think that's a wonderful chance to actually get to know people's spiritual lives in terms of just their writing process and the editing process. And then during those conversation sharing groups, right, just being present to staff members under our care to listen to what each of them is sharing, hear what they're picking up on, and monitoring, getting a pulse of the spiritual life of our faculty and staff, and then even modeling, right, really being committed to that 3-round spiritual conversation model, or any model that you choose to implement, and that you're modeling what healthy sharing is. And I realized just a couple of weeks later, and I put this point a little further down, but it's relevant here, right? These were then people that I could say, hey, we're going to do breakout groups during our faculty and staff retreat on the last Friday during Lent. Can you be a group facilitator? Right. I then had some group facilitators to really increase that culture of this kind of spiritual conversation model. Sowing the seeds of fellowship among some of the people who are attending were folks who were becoming obvious choices to ask to attend some of our province-sponsored retreats, whether for new teachers or veteran teachers. A couple of people in the group were part of our delegation to the JSN colloquium, right? So just getting a sense of who's out there based on who shows up. It's self-selecting, and then how do they participate? And even one person from that group is now part of the 19th Annotation Online retreat. Culturally, right, at a time where the president was stressing fellowship, stressing building community, to me, it's also a culture of vulnerability and lived faith, to be able to speak personally. And some people say, hey, these are personal questions, these are personal topics. Well, creating that safe space that at least lets enough people know this is a little risky. It is personal, but it's fulfilling and it's rewarding. And to get models and to hear kind of the stories you don't necessarily hear when you just break into, your faculty groups to talk about the test calendar, to really get to hear about people's personal lives. And I think even about like the Zoom group that met on the Thursday evenings. It was a smaller group. There were only 3 in the group, but one faculty member had just lost her mother. The other was dealing with his daughter's mental health issues, as she was a high school student herself. And yeah, it might not have been a large group, but it was certainly a significant space for them. Even for myself, I think that repetition of having to kind of make the Lenten journey. And one of the weeks, the gospel was from Luke, and it was about the fig tree that didn't bear fruit one year, and the gardener just pleads with the landowner, saying, give me one more year to cultivate this fig tree. And I remember how many more times then throughout the spring and summer when I was evaluating programs, and I also had to preach about it one Sunday, I kept coming back to that metaphor. So it enriched my life, for whether it was for preaching or also just kind of administrative programmatic conversations. And I can thank that group for really bringing that metaphor, among others, into focus for me. So I am going to run it back again this Lent. A couple of weeks ago, I did the initial conversation with the communications folks. I recruited kind of half returning, half new contributing authors. And what we'll do differently this year is, from a practical standpoint, I'm just going to do it during the Tuesday afternoon in person, realizing that the Zoom group is small and my schedule's a little bit different to have that extra time for that. And then the development team is willing to at least create an opt-in. We'll put it in the parents' newsletter and encourage them. And even for that group that I run with my mutual colleague, with Bob Michelle, I'm going to try to promote this to be maybe a couple of our sessions is, hey, let's look at the reflections from our faculty community, and maybe even we build a greater network of that moving forward. So I'm looking forward to turning towards Lent and even using this as a way, if I do it well during this Lent, to get a more regular faculty sharing group off the ground late into this year, into next.